Okay, thank you everybody, and welcome to our webinar on integrating graduation into cash transfer programs, experiences from Latin America. I am your moderator. My name is Lisa Hannigan. I'm the Director of Poverty and Social Transfers at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Most of my work is on social protection, but over the years I have done a lot of work also on graduation programs. Now, there have been a number of webinars that you would have seen on socialprotection.org on graduation programs, and of course many on all things social protection. But today is different. Today we're looking at the overlap and the synergies between graduation and social protection programs. Often you do hear discussions of graduation and social protection in terms of an either or. Should people be given access to graduation programs, or should they have access to social protection? Should a graduation program, for example, be tacked on to the end of a CCT program, a conditional cash transfer program, for example, to help people get off the program? But I guess I see today's discussion as a real step forward because there's such potential for complementarity between these programs. And so I'm so pleased that we're able to talk about how they can work together today. And that we've got some examples from Latin America where it has happened, provides an incredibly useful learning opportunity. So enough from me. Let me introduce our speaker and our two discussants. Firstly, we have Tatiana Rincon, who's the Vice President of Social Promotion and Livelihoods at Fundación Capital. Previously, Tatiana served as the National Director of the Local Economic Development and Trade Program of the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Tourism of Colombia. She served as the Director of International Cooperation of Ministry of Government and Justice. She has been a professor of the Universidad Externado de Colombia. She's also worked with the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, in Peru, the Carter Center in USA, and the North-South Institute in Canada. So welcome, Tatiana. Our first discussant is Julian Velasquez. He's a technical advisor, Victims Unit, Government of Colombia. Julian is a political scientist with an emphasis in public management from the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana and with a graduate degree in public policy analysis from Universidad Nacional of Colombia. Julian has over 10 years of professional experience in management, implementation, and evaluation, with specific experience in peace building, transitional justice, victims of internal armed conflict, citizen participation, entrepreneurship, and income generation for communities in context of economic and social marginalization. So welcome, Julian. And our second discussant is Jorge Maldonado. Jorge is an associate professor in the Department of Economics at Universidad de los Andes, Bogotá, Colombia. His main research interests are economics applied to the environment, natural resources and development, in particular in the nexus with poverty and livelihoods. Currently, he's a general coordinator of the platform of evaluation and learning of graduation programs in Latin America, funded by Ford Foundation, IDRC, and Fundación Capital. Jorge is also the director of the project Synergies between Social Protection and Productive Promotion in Latin America and Africa, funded by FEDA and executed jointly with FAO. So Tatiana is now going to speak for 30 minutes. Sorry, welcome Jorge. Tatiana is now going to speak for 30 minutes before we go to the discussants. For those watching the webinar in real time, I invite you to type your questions into the question box. And my internet connection is pretty good, but when we've tested it, it dropped out occasionally. if that happens, I will return. It hopefully won't have dropped out for long. So with that, I'll hand over to Tatiana, and Tatiana will speak for around 30 minutes. But actually, please, as she's speaking, and as the other speakers speak later on, please do remember about the question box. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and the organizers, SPEC. Thank you, Julian and Jorge, for joining us this morning in Australia, this afternoon in Latin America. Next, please. Let's start. Very briefly, let me share with you what is Fundación Capital and what is the work that we do. Fundación Capital is a social enterprise that improves the financial lives of people living in poverty around the world. We mainly work around three main issues. One is financial inclusion, productive inclusion, and digital inclusion. And we always work in collaboration, especially with governments and financial institutions. Next. And we work mainly in Latin America. We work with 12 governments in Latin America and 3 African governments. But our experience so far has been very, very focused in Latin America. Next. As in the productive inclusion area where I work, we have been working a lot with graduation programs and integrating graduation programs into social protection programs. And why? Well, as Lisa mentioned, you already have a lot of knowledge and expertise on graduation programs, but for us, it was really important because graduation programs are the most effective evaluated programs to tackle extreme poverty. So for us, it makes sense to really work with robust programs and an idea. Next. Like our experience since the very, very beginning at Fundación Capital has been working with governments. So for us, it was very, we knew from the very beginning, we learned a lot from BRAC and from the organizations who were working on graduation programs. Next, please. But we knew since the very, very beginning, we had to do a lot of innovations, and we couldn't run the programs as the way they were designed from the very beginning. So, for example, from the very, very beginning, we started using information and communications technology in order to reduce costs, to keep quality, also to be able to monitor the coaches who were working in the field, etc. We also were, since the very beginning, we said, okay, we have to add, instead of providing assets to the family and in-kind assets, we will use cash. We were advocates of using cash as seed capital in graduation programs. And we also, we were encouraging a lot of peer collaboration. So basically our work was to take the ideas from many organizations like BRAC and try to start integrated that in graduation programs. And we started working in 2013. Next, please. And we, with the support from the Ford Foundation and IDRC Canada, we started providing technical assistance to governments of 4 countries. Mexico, we were working with Prospera. In Honduras, we have a program with IDV and with the government of Honduras, which is still underway. In Paraguay, we also had a very important program. And in Colombia, we had 2 programs. One focused on extreme poor, and with the institution that is in charge of cash transfer programs in Colombia. And also we work with the victims unit because we had like a very particular situation in Colombia where we have a lot of victims of the armed conflict, and most of them are living in poverty and extreme poverty. Next. Like I'm not going to the details of the next chart, but I just like consider leaving that for your information. It compares the components of the graduation programs and how the programs and what is the difference and what was the different combinations that we use in the different programs. Next, because the idea is that today we will focus more on the evaluation component and what we have learned so far about this journey. We said, okay, it's not only important to implement those programs, but it is very important the knowledge and learning agenda. So with the support from Los Andes University, evaluations of all the programs that we were testing and running, and we created a very rich agenda that includes qualitative evaluations, quantitative evaluations. I am going deeper into that later. And we were able to do that with the funding and with the support that we had from the Ford Foundation and IDRC Canada, who have been supporting us throughout this journey. Next. So we saw a lot of opportunities regarding the integration of graduation programs into cash transfers and social protection in general. Like the very first opportunity that we identified is that there are certain components of the graduation approach that are already being done by governments. Governments in Latin America in general, they have very large and somehow like robust databases that we can work on. With the cash transfers, like people in poverty, living in poverty, they are already receiving a small stipend. So we said, okay, there is like a possibility of integrating this, but we also, next, we were aware of many challenges that are normal with governments and when we are working in general with social protection. So like one of the challenges like that we had to face was like the budgetary regulation of public funds. Like in control environments like NGOs, like you can control the funds, you don't have like these fiscal constraints annually. Like you have more flexibility for implementation. In government, with governments, you have like very strict regulations and ways of doing things, and also like when you have when you expect that certain institutions provide certain type of support, coordinating, doing this coordination among several government institutions is not easy at all. And sometimes the scope of work is not that simple. Sometimes a ministry or implementing organizations, there are like certain things that they can and they cannot do. So like honestly speaking, I was really excited about like all this evaluation agenda, but also I was very concerned about the results because we were working in a very uncontrolled environment. So we didn't know what was going to be the results. So we have a lot of evaluations, and you can find really like the whole reports of the evaluations. They are available for the public. But for today's presentation, I just wanted to highlight 5 main results that for me are really outstanding and summarizes somehow what we have been able to learn so far. So the very first result, next please, is that despite all the challenges, and I just mentioned a few of them, I can say that it is possible to integrate graduation programs within social protection and government social programs. And this can be normal right now, but when we started doing this evaluation and when we started doing the process, that wasn't clear. Like we didn't know if the results will sustain or not when graduation was being done with governments. So to me, this is really a very important result. Next, please. A second result, which is also very powerful for me, is that the evaluation results of these government-led programs in Latin America are similar to those obtained by NGOs in controlled environments and are very similar to this first generation of graduation programs that were studied and were evaluated by Innovations for Poverty Actions. Next, please. This is really important. As I mentioned before, like we had a lot of evaluations because we wanted to have like a more comprehensive evaluation, and not only like RCTs, but we wanted to really from Los Andes University. We designed a very rich evaluation agenda that included qualitative evaluations, life stories, process evaluation to understand how we can do better, what were the bottlenecks of the work, etc. We conducted outcomes assessments almost in all the countries, and we are conducting impact evaluations. We have an RCT that is that is being done right now in Honduras, and also we have an impact evaluation from our program in Paraguay. Next. And this chart that you are able to see is a little bit complex, but I really love it. This is like my graduation diploma, and where you can see here, you can see these gray lines. These gray lines represent the results from the evaluations conducted by Banerjee and the other colleagues who were doing the evaluations of the first generation of graduation programs. So here you can see like these gray lines, who are the summary of these evaluations. And then you see like this orange line. This orange line is, those are like the outcomes evaluations, the results evaluations in Paraguay. And the blue line is the impact evaluation in Paraguay as well. So as you can see in many of the indicators like perception of well-being, hours of work per day, the value of informal savings, more or less you can see that there are like some trends. And actually I'm very glad that we are here with Jorge right now. So if you have questions regarding this chart, he's the person to ask. Of course, not everything was positive. You see here, you see that there were like some sort of like setbacks in terms of spending and income, but we will refer to that later. Next, please. So when we were getting and the other results, like I was concerned, okay, Paraguay is doing very well. We know that the evaluation is very powerful, which was the previous slide that you saw. Since we are getting more and more evaluations, what we are seeing is that the results are very similar, and you can see a trend coming from the other countries. So in terms of income, for example, in Paraguay, income increased around like 15%, and it was 16% in Colombia with the programs with the victims, and in Mexico it was 64%. The number of working hours per day increased in all the countries, in Paraguay, in Mexico, in Colombia as well. Consumption it behaved in a varied way. We didn't see any significant change in Paraguay, but we see positive outcomes in Mexico. And in terms of savings increase in all countries, more or less 10% in all countries, and it's a trend that we can see that is forming as we are getting the results. And also, like in general, overall expectations and aspirations increased. Next, please. And also, I would say like third result is like we have been advocating all the time about the use of cash, and that we have to trust people. We have to give them cash in order to empower them instead of giving them assets. It's easier, it's cheaper. You empower them, you have to build trust with program participants. But we had a lot of debates, but we didn't have evidence about like how people was going to use the money. with your business. And just to give you an example, in Paraguay, participants were given $500, and when Jorge and his team went to see what happened 6 months after the end of the program, the businesses were worth $633 if it was measured through the impact evaluation, or the business was worth $1,660 if it was with the outcomes evaluation. Okay, I'm just gonna turn off my camera. Okay, next, please. A fourth result is like we were able to see in the field like how people were changing their mindset, and but it's something that we didn't have any evaluations, or we didn't have any it's something that we saw, but we didn't really have any results. But based on the evaluations that we have been receiving, we can say that participants changed their mindset. They passed from short term to medium and long term. And well, as you know, like families living in extreme poverty, they usually live by the day. They survive one day at a time. Today I think about what I'm going to eat, if I'm able to earn enough money to pay the rent where I sleep, and that's it. Families forget to dream. They just focus on their daily needs. And in this case, like families not only began to dream again, but they also started changing their mindset, their financial decisions reflected this change in mentality. Next. And this chart that you see is something that I borrowed from the evaluations Los Andes University conducted, and is that we saw that consumption didn't increase, it remained steady. Savings increased, but honestly speaking, like I was expecting like larger savings. The savings existed, but they were like moderated. But especially what we have been seeing in the evaluations is that the families were reinvesting their money and their earnings in their business, and the business were worth more. And this was really interesting and very important for us. Next. And also, like this is something that we identified in the qualitative evaluations when Los Andes University went to talk to the participants. Next, and people were saying, for example, that they were able to dream, that even like the community change. Next, please. For example, this participant, she was saying, people change their personalities, people in my community are kinder, solidarity increased. This is really important in my country, where solidarity has been affected because of the armed conflict. People know how to control their fears, face their fears, and this is something that really was really powerful for us. Next. And last but not least, another result, another conclusion is we have been using a lot of digital solutions from the program, but at the time we started using them, we didn't have any evaluations about about how they were performing and if they were effective or not. But we have been able to reduce cost, monitor the coaches that are in the field, and this facilitates a lot the scalability. So digital solutions have been instrumental in narrowing the digital gap, and this is something that we have seen, especially with the qualitative evaluations. Next. So like, for example, families, they were saying that the digital solutions are practical and they help them understanding, that they are very didactic, that they are able, that they are easy to comprehend, etc. So like, it's something that we use in not only in graduation programs, but in many programs, and our plans are to continue working on these type of solutions, because we saw the benefits in graduation programs and in so many other programs that we have at Fundación Capital. Next, please. What can be improved and what was missing? Of course, like I saw you, like the things that to me like very positive outcomes, but we are also aware that there are like things to improve and things that didn't work as we expected. So what can be improved? Like, I think that we can use digital solutions in a deeper way. We can enhance, for example, e-coaching and less in-person coaching, like to try to find a balance to see how we can continue reducing the cost of the graduation program. Since technology evolves so in a really fast way, year by year, we can really take advantage of these technologies to do better things for the people. Also, like, our programs target women, like 90% of programs participants are women, but our programs, they do not really promote gender equality. So we know that we have like, there are like a lot of positive benefits for women, but the program design is not really gender oriented, or there is not a really a gender focus on the program. And I think that we can prevent many things and enhance and promote gender equality. For example, early pregnancy is common among people living in extreme poverty, especially in rural areas. So we can do something about it. Like, also there is a concern about women's economic empowerment and intra-household violence. Honestly speaking, we don't know what is happening inside the households. So this is something that we really need to focus and to identify how we can prevent this potential outbreaks of violence happening in the house because of women economic empowerment. And also, we believe that we can prevent a lot of issues happening within the household and promote like a more equitable work in the houses. Also, I think that we can strengthen our ties with the private sector. We had a really good experience, like especially in Paraguay, connecting program participants with the small value chains. But this is something that needs to be done more structurally and in a larger scale. So yeah, that's this is more or less like some of the conclusions that we have and some of the results that we have so far, and that we are very glad to be able to share with you. And well, I was very fast because I really want to start a dialogue with all of you, and hopefully engage with you with your questions, with the questions that you may have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Tatiana. That was really interesting. Just before we go to the discussants, so it's really clear to those who are watching, I just had a quick question for you. So before we move on, you've seen graduation programs work that are not attached to social protection programs, and social protection programs work that aren't attached to graduation programs, which are most of them. There are definitely synergies in terms of targeting and the stipends that you've mentioned. But what do you see as other key benefits of the overlap of social protection and graduation? A social protection program that beneficiaries access before, during, during, and then after their participation in the graduation programs?
Yeah, well, to me, like in my experience, like basic safety nets, cash transfer programs, they only provide like a minimum level of well-being. So it's like you avoid people going down into misery, but they are never able to leave extreme poverty. But it's like you have a net that protects you, but that's the minimum you can get. When and also like another important thing is that basic safety nets are focused to invest on children. And in Latin America, like the main objective of these social protection networks are to avoid the intergenerational transmission of poverty. And the focus is on children. So when we integrate graduation programs, like the focus shifts into the mothers or the caregivers. So we are giving access to economic opportunities to the mother. And this is really, really powerful because people become more resilient. They are able to weather crises. Also, like if something happened, if they are not able to receive the stipends from the government during time, they are able to provide to their households. And like even like the mindset of the people changes. So it's a really huge difference. It's like passing from basic safety nets into really productive safety nets. So it's going beyond the minimum level. So I'm really like a huge advocate of integrating both. And the goal in Latin America is not to withdraw people from the cash transfers. We believe that the cash transfers should continue because again, like the objective is to provide children the opportunity to break this intergenerational transmission of poverty. So people are not withdrawn from the program, even if they are not extreme poor anymore. Indeed, I believe Jorge has like these detailed results, but we were able to see how many of the participants were able to pass from extreme poverty to poverty. They were able to cross the line. But in general, we believe that the government support through social protection should continue. But the difference is really huge. And I don't know, maybe if Jorge wants to complement this answer.
Thanks. Oh, Jorge, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with Tatiana on the importance of the social protection network that is provided by the conditional cash transfers. But there is also other roles that the conditional cash transfers can play in promoting the possibilities of the participants into well-being, and we can talk about that later.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Jorge. Thanks, Tatiana. I might just get Julian on the screen now. Julian Velasquez.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you. So in Colombia, the program worked with victims of armed conflict, and I believe, Julian, you were involved in the implementation of that program. So during that implementation, the field workers that supported the families, so the coaches, were peers, I understand, so former victims of the conflict. What was the result of this approach? Would you be able to talk about that a little?
Okay, first of all, I want to explain a little bit of the program of Colombia.
Great.
This program consists in offer capacities to the participants to have more tools, allow them and increase their human, social, financial, and productive capital social. And in this way, give more efficient use to their resources that will be received from the unit victims. the unit victims give to the victims of the conflict armed and indemnization. Depends of the one case is a for the war, for the displacement, is depends of the case. And the other way, the purpose of the program Transformando Mi Futuro was provide a comprehensive support to victims who are interested in investment, their compensation, the indemnization to start to or improve on business, and this increase their productive human, social, and financial assets. But I want to explain for me one of the major adjustments of the program was to need incorporate the theme of emotional recovery for training models. Do you hear me? Hello?
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
Yes, I heard. Thank you.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, great. So did you witness additional benefits beside the economic ones?
Yes, I think that the benefits for the victims is give more efficient use to the compensation resources, better reconstruction of the victims' life plans, and use the technology like a tablet tools in a people who do not have previous experience in learning process.
Yeah, great. Okay. Thanks, Julian.
You're welcome.
So, Jorge, you've been in charge of the evaluation of the overall program. What main result has impressed you most?
Thank you, Lisa. I just have to recall that in this case, in Latin America, the graduation programs were implemented by the governments for the first time. And that is one of the issues that make a difference in the way that they evolve and in the way that they generate results. One of the most important results that I have seen throughout all of the evaluations is how the life skills coaching has the ability to change the lives of the people. We have observed how people can empower, and this empowerment reflects on making better decisions, face the challenges that they face every day, and is a strong tool for moving out of the poverty. We have also observed that there is an important effect on the gender roles and the gender equality promoted within the household. The social capital have strengthened, and the expectations and all of the what now we call the soft skills of the participants have improved. That is really impressive. And the other thing that impressed me a lot was how the effectiveness of the program depends on the willingness of the government officers to promote and to be engaged on the implementation of the program. So we have found officials that are really seriously committed to the program, and the quality of these officers is determinant for the success of the implementation of this approach that, as Tatiana was mentioning, is really complex when we have governments in the middle of the arena.
Yeah. Okay. And what do you see as some of the main things that, I guess Tatiana talked about some of the things yet to be improved. What are you seeing similar things? Are there other areas you think need to be improved?
Well, I concur with Tatiana in some issues. I think that the main challenge of this graduation approach is now scaling up to more people. And this issue of scaling up and covering more and more participants implies a lot of challenges. One of the challenges is the one related with the coaching. So if we want to have a good coaches working with the participants everywhere, we will need to build strong capacities into the professional community that are the people that finally engage on these issues. Another issue that is important in terms of improvement is to recognize that participants are heterogeneous. So at the beginning, one thinks that all of the population are very similar, but at the end you found different categories of the people participating, depending on their initial capacities, on their initial abilities, but also depending on the challenges that they have faced throughout their lives. So there is not only this classification that is now common in this topic of graduation of dividing the participants into slow climbers and fast climbers, but we also have a plethora of different levels of abilities and creativity and entrepreneurship that makes probably interesting to think how to attend different abilities of the participants into different ways of improving their abilities. The other issue that we, as Tatiana mentioned before, in part, is how to attend their insertion of the participants into markets, how to prevent shock related with prices, shock related with commercialization, and shocks related with the climatic conditions. Most of the participants are rural participants that depend on farming for their income generation and subsistence, and that implies that if they are facing a climatic condition that is difficult for them, the results are vanished for not only for them, but also for the program when we are trying to evaluate. So it is important to think how to face now this new world in which climatic change is part of the agenda, and how to prevent and from the beginning be prepared to face these challenges.
Yep, great. Okay, thanks, Jorge. Now we've received a number of questions from the audience, and so we might start trying to attack some of those. The first one, I'm not sure. Maybe if we start with Tatiana. Again, you talked a little bit about gender in your presentation and that it is an area that we need to be doing more on. A question has come in around. I guess looking at the program and its impact on men. It says, judging from your pictures of women in these programs, what have been the status and role of men? How have they been affected? How has this affected perceptions around gender equality and the responsibility of social protection on women?
Yeah, well, I would say that there was an initial, there has been a spillover effect. There was an intended, when we started working with digital solutions, and the coaches arrived with tablets at the houses, something that we didn't expect but happened, and I'm really glad it happened, is that men also were very curious and interested, and children. So like everyone gathered around a tablet and they started learning. So like overall, we started changing the attitudes of the members of the household, at least certain attitudes, but it was not intentional. It just happened. Even when we were developing the materials, like I remember we were focusing a lot on women, and I remember like a lady saying to me, how can I save if my husband is not saving? If it's something that we don't do together, I am not going to be able to do it alone. So the program had certain like positive effects on men and women role. However, what I think is that also there can be like, for example, like women are working more hours, but what is happening with the non-paid work at the house? Who is doing that work? Is the men doing that? Like the evaluation, I mean, the design and the evaluation didn't include this part, didn't really focus on gender issues. So even if we know that we are affecting, I mean, we know that overall the program has been very beneficial, and like even when we were working with soft skills, we enhanced a lot of communication, and like the best households you can see is when men and women collaborate and they work together. There is like a gray area, in my opinion, and like being very honest, I believe that we have a lot to work on. And right now we embark in a new work with IDRC Canada to really design a new program that is like a really focus on gender. And based on these lessons, like we hope to be able to expand the lessons into the rest of the designs that we have right now. So we want to go beyond just focusing on 90% women. We need to really have like a more like gender-oriented program. I know that Jorge worked a little bit, like especially on evaluating the impact on gender roles in Paraguay. At least what we could learn so far from the evaluations, it wasn't the original idea, but he was able to gather some data and some information. So I don't know, Jorge, what you can add to that.
Sure. This is a very important topic. In the case of Paraguay, even though we have only 10% of men as participants in the program, we observed that the impact on savings was much more stronger for the case of women than for the case of men. The other important result that we observed was that the gender roles within the household were improved much better from the point of view of men than on the case of women. However, I have to say that there is some literacy that has shown us, some literature that has shown us that in some cases, even the cash transfer programs generate conflicts within the household. And in the case of the graduation programs, the same conflicts can appear because in some societies, the men feel that the women are gaining too much power within the household, and that can generate some conflicts. I just dreaming, I can imagine what would happen if we implement the graduation approach in which both spouses at the house are receiving simultaneously the program. Probably we can get new insights from that approach. And something similar, if you remember, Julian, we had in the case of Transformando Mi Futuro, and we tried to give the coaching in pairs, and in some cases the pair was composed by both the husband and the wife of the household receiving the program. So this is not typical of this approach, but probably it's interesting to explore more on this to see how the intra-household roles are evolving with the program.
Yes, I want to explain one of the results of this approach. The peer methodology generates basic skills for problem process such as feeling of safety in learning. And another one, field workers accompaniment, guide and advise the participants willing to listen their needs and difficulties. And I think that is the major uh, approach or result of this approach specific in Colombia.
Okay. I don't see Lisa. Maybe her connection dropped. But I can see another question from the participant. Actually, it's addressed to me, but I think that Jorge can answer better. It says, let me see. There has been an evaluation on the e-coaching, and how do they do compared to the in-person coaching? Jorge, Lisa, I was stealing your your party. I didn't see you. I'm sorry. I was playing your role. Sorry.
Well, I just have to say that what we observed with the e-coaching was a tremendous change in the way that households learn to manage technologies like the use of cell phones and the use of tablets, and how they gain so much from that. We started from households that never in their lives had a cellular in their hands, and then they gain a lot of confidence in using the tablets, and a lot of confidence on trying to navigate through internet. And in some particular cases, we have some women that started businesses and activities learning from navigating in the internet, but 2 years before they were unable of doing that. So we observed both in the quantitative and in the qualitative analysis a strong effect of the e-coaching in the self-confidence and in the ability to handle these electronic devices.
Yeah, maybe what I can add is we have another program on financial inclusion that we run in 4 countries in Latin America. And we conducted an RCT in these 4 countries. And the program focuses a lot on teaching financial inclusion and financial literacy using tablets. And the results have been really outstanding. So if you want, we can give you the link and the information on the evaluation results in general terms of digital solutions for development and for training program participants.
I guess that Lisa is again
we have a
Yeah, I think that Lisa has maybe has a connectivity issue. I'm gonna see here, I see another question from the audience, and is how are the learnings from Latin America being contextualized for Fundación Capital's programs in Africa, where literacy levels of participants may be lower? Thank you, Rahul, for this question. Like overall, like even if in Latin America program participants in theory they have been most of them have been through primary school. What we have witnessed is that at least 70% of program participants have a lot of problems reading and writing. So like with the tablets and with the digital solution, everything is oral. So we don't have we have very few text in the tablets. We encourage more like the orality in the programs. So, but basically, when we change from country to country, or even in this case, from continent to continent, we have to do a lot of work with the anthropologist and start at really looking at the very specific context. Like I would say, like the biggest difference between our programs and the programs that we have been supporting in Africa is that we are trying to add value to the work that many organizations have been doing in Africa. So we have not been running the entire programs, but we are contributing more, like especially like with the digital solutions part and the training part. But it is not like running the whole thing as we do in Latin America.
Great.
Okay.
So it's Lisa here. I'm keeping my camera off. So we have a question from Isabel Wisson on, did you provide any guidance to the households on how to spend the seed capital? Given that you didn't provide assets like a lot of the other programs, what guidance was there around the seed capital?
Yeah. Jorge, would you like to answer that one?
Okay, yeah. In the case of the graduation programs in Latin America, thanks to the tablet and thanks to the design of the program that it was based on cash, the coaching included a series of modules and visits in which the coaches helped the participants to create what we call business plans. And with the business plans, they decided on what was the best option for each of them. And with this option, they define a budget and a list of assets to be bought with the seed capital. So in fact, they were accompanied all of the process thanks to the coaching and the financial module included into the training program.
On governance, was any work done to increase the governance capacity within the community to support group savings programs?
No, the answer is very easy. No, we really didn't do much in terms of increasing community capacity. Like the program focused a lot on program participants, but we didn't strengthen community ties. And also, like especially in Colombia, because of the conflict, because of the armed conflict, sometimes people are very, I mean, they don't want necessarily to work with the community because our ties were breaking down due to the armed conflict. So even like if I remember right now, one of the negative, one of the results that was not very positive, for example, with the victims program in Colombia, is we were not able even to increase the community ties and the community networks. This is, I would say, in our particular cases because of our history, but the program didn't work much on that regards, and I know it's like a very important component of the program in the way that it is being done in many parts of the world.
On the other hand, I have to highlight that the financial component of the training was an important one in the case of these graduation programs, and in most of the cases we observed at the end that in fact the households create the saving groups, and they started initiative for collaborating in terms of creating these chains of savings and roscas and different activities for improving their financial behavior within the community.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jorge. Now, when people talk about graduation, and they often talk about Bangladesh and the graduation programs that began their life there. And recent analysis out of BRAC that began the graduation programs seems to show a plateauing of household gains after about 7 years. From what you know of how the programs are working in Latin America, would you expect to see something similar there? That there will be other, I guess, other factors that constrain the ability of households to continually rise out of poverty. What do you think about that for Latin America?
Well, one of the main challenges of all of these programs is their sustainability and how to guarantee that people involved in a continuous and permanent way into their productive activity. And the question, it doesn't have an easy answer. I would say that as Tatiana showed, that in the case of Paraguay, we observed that people were reinvesting their income into a second round of assets, say buying more cows or investing more in infrastructure for their productive activity. So in this case, probably it is expected that they will keep going forward and out of poverty in these cases. But it depends a lot on the type of productive activity in which they engage. Just remember that the productive activity was defined jointly with the co-share path, not necessarily implies that the commercialization channels were there at the end of the implementation. So in some cases, we observed that participants were able to continue their productive activities. In other cases, they decided to move into another activity or just stop gaining from the originally defined activity. So there are different factors that they are kind of difficult to be able to say what to expect, no? And the other issue is that the intervention by the governments, as it was promoted so far, is planned to finish with the intervention and just stop all of the other possible activities for the household. So there is no a guarantee of the continuity of the programs or the interventions to move into a ladder of graduation for the households out of the poverty.
Yep. Okay.
And if I may add to that, I believe that there is something that was done in the program in Paraguay, but was not done in the other countries, and is in Paraguay, the team work a lot in promoting markets, internal markets, as well as connecting with the small value chains. And my theory, at least, is that as long as I have a market, I will continue with my business. If I don't have any place where to sell my products, well, I will stop doing that, and then I won't see any sustainability. And for example, in the program in Paraguay, I really like that they work with, they promoted like growers markets, and they train the participants, so they will organize among themselves, and they will go to a main city or an intermediate city to sell their products. So I have seen groups that they, after the program finished 2 years ago, even if the program finished 2 years ago, people are continuing increasing their business, etc., because they were able to identify a place to sell, and even they gain a lot of confidence, and even they manage to talk with the local authorities, and they have like a nice place where they can sell their products, etc. But if we don't create these capacities, I don't think that we will be able to achieve what BRAC has been doing in Bangladesh in terms of having a really sustainable program. One advantage that Bangladesh has is that it has a really vibrant market and economy. It's a very lively place, but in Latin America, we have like really isolated places where we cannot find this.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tatiana. And just actually, while we're talking about markets, we have another question around linking to markets. I mean, it's so important for graduation programs. So would you be able to walk us through how this work around markets is done? And if there's any examples of exceptionally good practice in this area, of any of the programs that you're working on, it's really, I guess, taken the lead on how to effectively link to market.
Yeah, we have, hello, Jorge, or can you explain what we did with the value chain in Paraguay and with the private organizations?
Exactly. Probably the base case, as Tatiana was mentioning, was the case in Paraguay. In Paraguay, the government was very active, and they were able to create consortiums with the private sector, and the private sector engaged in providing tools for the value chain of the chamomile in the country, and with a special focus on the participants of the graduation program. So they could invite all of the participants to be involved in the production of chamomile, and they provided since the beginning support for the seeding and technical assistance, and they accompanied the participant across the process, and they provide the opportunity of buying their production once the harvest was obtained. So this is a key element, because if we don't have a good commercialization chain, and if we don't have an aggregated value chain that guarantees that the participants can produce their products and have the opportunity of creating added value on that, and be able to take that to the markets. So the increase in the incomes and in the earnings will be always a challenge, and probably will be the most difficult barrier to face when we are trying to promote these graduation programs.
Yeah, the World Economic Forum selected this practice as one of the practices to showcase this year. But I would say it was a very good first attempt, but we know that since it was the first time that we did, we have to iterate to strengthen this approach. But I also believe that, especially like if we are going to work in scale, in some countries, we really need to strengthen this to avoid market saturation, as Jorge was mentioning before. So with some pilots, it was okay, like the markets were able to, by themselves, they were able to absorb the production. But in a large scale, this is a component that needs to be really considered, studied to avoid any potential risks in the future. And actually, I believe that we wrote a blog on that. I can also provide the link where the case is fully explained.
Yep, great. Thank you for that. Actually, just while we're talking about, I mean, you mentioned scale, and I think Jorge mentioned scale earlier in the webinar. And it's a big issue for graduation programs. And it would be good to have like some explanation in Latin America, where governments seem to be seeing the most value from overlaying graduation programs onto existing social protection programs. I imagine governments are not saying, let's provide graduation programs for every single beneficiary of our social protection programs. But is the focus for, does it seem to be more for particular pockets of poverty or specific marginalized groups? What are you seeing playing out in Latin America in terms of how the government wants to utilize graduation programs linking with their existing social protection programs?
Well, my point of view is that graduation programs are designed for attending extreme poverty, and it has a good role to play doing that. If we want to attend other groups of the society that are into vulnerability, the program needs to be adjusted. Just we can remember that in the case of the victims in Colombia, the program was not aimed exactly to extreme poor households, and in fact we observed that the performance of the household was different depending on this vulnerability condition at the beginning. We could observe people that were victim of the conflict, but not necessarily people in extreme poverty, or when they have better abilities or better level of education, so they move in a different way that the people that were at the same time people victim of the conflict and people in condition of extreme poverty or vulnerability. So this is the case that, as I was mentioned before, we have to consider the heterogeneity of the population, and that even if we think that most of the population that are poor are very homogeneous, in reality they are not that homogeneous, and we have to consider these different possible groups into the focalization programs and the focalization activities, so as to guarantee that when the program is designed for certain capacities and certain abilities of the household, really they reach this portion of the population. I don't know if Julian want to tell us about this heterogeneity in the case of victims.
Yes, I think that the Colombian government, through the units of victims, implemented the Transformando Mi Futuro, like a graduation program with the purpose of contributing to the reconstruction of the victims' life plans and the strengthening of business capacities for the implementation of unit productions, or strengthening of exists once through training models in a human development, saving, and entrepreneurships. I think that the graduation programs provides lot of tools for the victims, because through the methodology pairs to pairs, the victims can explain, and the other person who or he can do it he can take her dreams. And for the unit of victims, is the major goal to take for the victims to receive the indemnification and the others offered to the government.
Yeah,
Great.
I was just remembering in the case of Mexico, for example, with the previous administration, we were saying, okay, graduation should go to the 20% poorest participants in the cash transfer program. It should not be aimed to everyone, but the idea was to, from the large government database, the idea was to identify the 20% poorest. And on top of that, I would add, in Latin America, you always find people who live in really isolated areas where there are no available market opportunities. Even if they are living in extreme poverty, I believe another approach should be try with these participants, because sometimes even like transportation costs could make the programs not necessarily to be successful. So I totally agree. Graduation is not for everybody, and not for, not even for all the people who are living in extreme poverty. And also even age, another factor that should be considered as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Now, we'll be wrapping up shortly, but I just have one last question that's come in that I think we should ask, because when people talk about graduation programs, often they're also talking about cost, and they're known not to be the cheapest of programs, but there have been a lot of developments around the globe on different ways to reduce the cost of graduation programs. So other than technology and the use of tablets, are there any innovations that you're seeing on the programs that you're working on that can lower the cost of graduation programs that others might be able to learn from?
Well, in our case, in Latin America, honestly speaking, well, the program is expensive. It's around $1,200 US. More or less $500 are the seed capital. But for being very, very honest, when I compare to other productive inclusion programs, the cost of the program is not that high in our particular context. However, if we want to reach millions, even in Latin America, we have to see how we can reduce the cost. So we have not tried that. I think that we have a lot to learn from other organizations who are already doing that. For example, I know that BRAC was identifying certain participants who could afford a microcredit with a very reduced rate. I think this is something that we can try in Latin America with the program that Julian was implemented in the victims unit. Since the victims, we didn't give a seed capital in that program. And we saw that many of the victims were really encouraged, and even they look for microcredits in certain institutions with very reduced interest rates. So that can be an alternative. I believe this is like part of the global agenda, the global learning agenda on graduation. And since we are going to work on really scaling up the program in Paraguay, so for example, we really have to start looking at what others have been doing, and I believe this is a quest that all of the organizations and people who are working on graduation, this is a question that all of us we have, and I believe that there are some people who are really trying to do to answer that questions and who are already testing and doing some work around this.
And I would like to add that from my point of view, every dollar spent on the program is worthwhile. So it can seem that it's very expensive, but at the end, the benefits that are collected from the intervention really are higher than this cost. So I have seen, we have been evaluating other programs of intervention to reduce or combat poverty, and what I have found is that when the programs involve the participation of coaches and the coaching is done in this personal way, face-to-face with the participants, the gains from that easily overcome the costs that are associated with this. So I hardly can imagine a graduation program or a graduation approach in which the coaching is reduced or is avoided just to avoid costs. I think that one of the successful points of the graduation approach, and one of the is a significant element that makes a difference is this personalized coaching that creates self-confidence, this gaining in the trust and in the abilities of the person to become a better person, and this is worthwhile the dollar spent on the program.
Great, thanks Jorge. And just to add to that, we've got a comment from Karen from ADB, and Karen's been working on a graduation model in the Philippines, and she said they are exploring reducing the costs by working with BRAC and IPA to test models of group-based coaching and group-based assets versus the standard individual coaching and assets. So that will be an interesting one to watch. Now I'll see, my connection seems to be better. I might see if I can put myself back on, turn my camera back on. Hi again. So on behalf of the social protection and employment community, I want to thank you, appreciate the time today. You've given us a really useful glimpse into how graduation is evolving in Latin America. And given that developments in Latin America have informed the rest of the globe on social protection, I imagine this will be similarly influential. We are at only early stages in establishing the evidence base for this social protection graduation overlap. But this is an exceptional start, so thank you again. And for everybody listening and watching, if you do have any further questions, please do reach out to Fundación Capital or directly to SPEC, the social protection and economic and employment community, and we'll be able to get back to you. But thanks again, everybody. It's been a great webinar, and thanks for all of those who have been watching and who have put their questions up. We really appreciate it. And until next time, okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, see you.